Lemuria was an ancient civilization which existed prior to and during the time of Atlantis. Physically, it is believed that Lemuria existed largely in the southern Pacific, between North America and Asia/Australia. Lemuria is also sometimes referred to as Mu, or the motherland of Mu. At its peak of civilization, the Lemurian people were both highly evolved and very spiritual. While concrete physical evidence of this ancient continent may be difficult to find, many people know that they have a strong connection to Lemuria. Approximately 14,000 years ago, the culture known as Lemuria was thriving. There were also other cultures on Earth, such as Atlantis, which were thriving as well. The holy people or the prophets of the Lemurian culture began to be aware that something was going to be changing. They began receiving information that the Earth was going to go through a very dramatic shift. The shift that they were referring to was what you call a great flood. You've also called it the destruction of Atlantis. These holy people of Lemuria were very much in touch with the land. They were the ancient ancestors of the Native Americans. They began to be aware that it was very important that the knowledge from Lemuria be preserved. And so for about 2,000 to 3,000 years, they were preparing for this great cataclysm. They began spreading their teachings about the Earth and about mankind's history to as many people as they possibly could. They believed that if they could spread this information to as many people as possible, the information would be stored within the cells of the human bodies. Then it would never be forgotten. They also began to store information in crystals. These crystals were taken deep within the earth to be stored and preserved. These ancient Lemurians also began to create detailed maps of the underground tunnels that existed between power points on your planet. They also took the time to prepare their plans. They knew that they would receive a sign telling them it was time to go underground before the floods came. So they prepared themselves for these several thousand years to be the sacred keepers of the records of Earth. They knew it was very important that the information they held be saved for when the waters receded. Otherwise, the entire history of Earth and the sacred teachings of the Lemurians would have been lost forever. These holy people received their signs and began going underground. This occurred approximately 1 year before the flood. While underground, they learned to live there and use the underground environment for their sustenance. They built very supportive and loving communities underground. During that year, they did the final work involved in preserving some of the knowledge that they knew needed to be preserved. Then the flood came. All these people who were underground were safe from the waters, even though many people on the surface of the earth perished. When the waters receded, the people emerged from underground. The land they once knew was now very different. This emergence from the earth is the point at which the Native Americans' creation history begins. In a very literal sense, they did emerge from the earth. Most of the native peoples have lost the exact literal memory of this emergence, but within the highest ranks of the shamans, this knowledge is still passed on now. We tell this story from the point of view of the Native Americans, but they were not the only people who went underground. The holy people all around this planet went underground. For instance, the Aborigines in Australia and those who were later to become the Druids in England were all preserving their knowledge underground as well. The Druids were preserving the ancient Atlantean information, as were the Egyptians. But the native peoples of the Pacific area, including Asia, were preserving the Lemurian information. These native peoples, even today, hold within themselves this sacred knowledge. Some of it is conscious, but most of it lies in the subconscious. The Ainu of Japan are one of the tribes that preserved some of the knowledge. There was a great cooperation among all of these peoples on earth to make sure that the sacred teachings were never lost. The ancient knowledge is rising to consciousness. The prophets also knew that when the new time came, after the flood, mankind would move away from the sacred teachings. The prophets knew that there would be a very long period of time during which the teachings would have to be kept hidden. They knew that one day that cycle would end and the teachings would once again emerge from each and every person. That is what is happening now for all of you. You are drawn to visit places like the Native American sacred spots or Peru or Egypt because you are feeling this ancient knowledge beginning to rise to the surface within you, and you seek to find a vehicle through which that memory can be activated. As the memory is activated in each of you, it will not necessarily take the form of information. Instead, it will simply take the form of your own spiritual and inner wisdom. The ancients never had religion and never felt the need to make someone else believe the way they did. That pattern happened only after the flood. The ancients all had an inner wisdom and an inner spirituality that was never discussed or argued about. Even though everyone is unique and has his or her own spiritual beliefs, ultimately those beliefs all are the same idea. On the most beliefs are the belief in a higher power, love and respect for each other, and love and respect for the earth. That is the very basic foundation of spirituality. That was the spirituality of the ancients, and that is the spirituality that is awakening within you. It doesn't matter whether you are Buddhist, Shinto or Christian. All that matters is that basic foundation of spirituality, belief in a higher power, love and respect for each other, and love and respect for the earth. It is really that simple. As you travel to these hallowed spots and you get back in touch with the earth, that's how the spirituality gets awakened within you. Do not underestimate the power of the experiences you have while you are on this trail. They awaken within you something that was lying asleep for quite a long time. Reincarnationally, you are those ancient Lemurians. You are fulfilling your agreements by being here now and helping in the awakening. You all carry those memories within you. Honor that and trust that you do have them within you. The question that has been asked of us so many times is, what's going to happen now? Is there going to be another cataclysm like the flood? How is this new awareness going to be activated on Earth? You are all working very hard on an energetic level so that you will not bring about another cataclysm. We do not perceive that you are going to experience another flood or destructive earthquake. This time the change is going to happen within you. You are going to experience, in a sense, your own personal internal earthquake, your own crumbling of belief systems that no longer serve you. So in a sense, there is going to be destruction and the ending of a cycle, but it's not going to take place around you in the physical world. It's going to take place in an even more powerful place within you. So do not fear if old things you carry begin falling away. Do not fear if old relationships can no longer be the same. Most of all, do not fear exploring the unknown, for the deeper you go within, the more profoundly you are going to experience this. Know that all that happens to you, even the things that may be disturbing, is part of your own personal release of the old. As you are releasing the old, you will be exposed to new ideas. They may feel strange or foreign to you, but just keep yourself open and allow whatever is there to come to you before you assume that it is not for you. Stay open and explore. During this tour, the ancient energies that you are exposed to are going to accelerate this process even more, for it is time now for the awakening to happen. You have all chosen to be the pioneers who help to lead the planet in this age. There is a very powerful site in Santa Fe called Pandula. To describe what the energy is like there is very difficult, so please bear with us. Pandula is one of the places on Earth that integrates the star energy and the ancient Earth energy, so when you visit there, you may feel strong that energy, but at the same time you may feel the presence of the Earth Mother very strongly too. It is very important that on each planet there be sacred spots that integrate both the star and the planet energy. Pandula is one such place. There are many. For instance, in Japan you have Mount Kurama. So as you are walking through Pandula, feel your feet planted firmly on the ground and at the same time feel your star connection. One of the themes of your time in Sedona has been grounding. You allowed yourself to take a very difficult hike. You succeeded because you allowed the Earth to support you. You became one with the Earth. From the Earth you drew strength, and it is the strength that is now going to help you as you go to the second part of the tour. The energy of Santa Fe is going to be different, but it is very closely connected to what you experienced this morning. When the tour is over you will see how they fit together. The Native Americans do something called the rain dance. Today much of the significance of that ceremony has been lost. Today the belief is that the dance makes it rain. However, in the ancient days, the rain dance was very much like what you experienced with the crowds. The Native Americans would do a rain dance not because they wanted it to rain, but because they could sense the energy of the environment and they were moved to become part of the environment and celebrate the rain. There is a subtle difference. We hope we have explained it. You experienced that feeling of being one with the earth. It was very important to bring up that ancient knowledge. What is the significance of the snake people? The snake people are very, very ancient. They existed approximately 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. They were descendants of the Lemurians, in particular, descendants of the original record keepers of Lemuria. The snake, in terms of symbology, has always been used on Earth to mean wisdom. So you find many cultures around Earth in which the snake, as a symbol, plays a very important role. Now today, you were taken to a place called Montezuma's Well. The myth is that that was one of the emergence points of the ancient Lemurian/Native American. Sedona is one of the places that was first inhabited by the people who were keeping the records. After they emerged, their civilization lived mostly high in the cliffs. At that time Sedona was a chain of islands, so they had to live on higher ground. This original group that came from beneath the earth lived here and, of course, procreated, so there were many generations here. The snake people are descendants of those original ones from beneath the earth. Now you've all seen the large amount of quartz crystal that is in the red rock, and you all know that quartz crystal can hold information and knowledge. Sedona was chosen as an emergence point because of all the quartz crystal in the area. It would be very easy to use all the quartz crystal in the rock to hold the knowledge of Lemuria. So the snake people living in this area were committed to programming that knowledge into the rocks. This is why so many people are now drawn to Sedona. Anyone who has a Lemurian connection will naturally be drawn here. All of you, at one time or another, belong to the snake people tribe. Are there any ruins of Lemurian temples in the Sedona area? There are some physical remains of those temples, but they are so eroded now that you really couldn't recognize them as remains of a temple. However, energetically those temples still exist. They can only be accessed on the inner planes through your dream state or through your meditations, but they are still very active. That's another reason why people feel so drawn to come to Sedona. They have traveled here in other states of consciousness, so even though their physical bodies haven't been here, they feel familiar with it. There are many Lemurian temples here interdimensionally. Is there any connection between those who survived the Great Flood and extraterrestrials? What a wonderful and creative question. No one has ever asked this before, and it is one of the particular areas of interest for us. We assume that a good number of you have read The Prism of Lyra, but we will attempt to keep it very simple in case you haven't. The people who went underground during the flood could be associated with what we call the Syrians or the Syrian energy. Their symbol was the snake. They were the keepers of knowledge throughout. As to whether there were people who survived the flood on the surface, the answer is yes. You have a biblical story about a man named Noah who built an ark. That story is very true with one exception. There was not just one Noah but many people around the planet who built arks or boats to survive the flood. So when the flood finally receded, there were those who had gone underground and there were those who had stayed above ground. And yet there was contact among those who stayed above ground. There were two factions. There was one faction that we would say was oriented toward the energy from Sirius. Those people had a love for mankind and a desire for peace and knowledge. But there was another faction that was more aligned with what we would call the Lyran influence. They were the ones who wanted power. Some of those people were the ones in powerful positions in Atlantis. Now we're talking about those who stayed above ground. For the most part, those who went underground were all of one orientation. Native Americans have remained separate to preserve the knowledge. All through history, you have had conflict between the knowledge keepers and those hungry for power. That still happens today, so as soon as the floods receded, the conflict started again. That is why the people who are now considered Native American did not integrate themselves with the rest of the world. They kept themselves separate in order to assure that the knowledge would be preserved. They allowed the power struggle to continue while they simply sat back and tried to preserve the knowledge. You can see that is happening now, but the cycle is finishing, because so many of you now are beginning to realize how important that spiritual knowledge is. As more and more of you begin a spiritual search, those in power will have to change their ways because they won't be able to manipulate people anymore. So your individual search for your own spiritual truth eventually affects the entire planet. This time on your planet that you are calling the New Age is the completion of many thousands of years of conflict. We perceive that the conflict will be healed. How long did people live underground? How long were their lives? When the flood receded, about half of those who were underground emerged. Half stayed underground because they were not quite sure it was safe to emerge. Those who emerged saw that conflict was already beginning on the surface once again, so they retreated and kept to themselves. They refused to become part of that conflict. That's why today there is such a division between Western society and the native peoples. The Native Americans do not want to play the game of conflict. The people who stayed underground remained there for several more generations. At one point, half of the half emerged, but there was still a group who remained underground. They are still there. They are the people you call the Inner Earth people. They have evolved quite rapidly over the past several thousand years. They have built their own society totally independent of yours, and in a sense they have mutated to allow themselves to adapt to life below the surface. They do not want to play the game of conflict either. Their lives are quite long, a lifespan averaging approximately 600 to 800 years. They do not procreate at the rate you do, so there is no population problem. In terms of the longevity of people during the period of the flood, their lifespan was longer than yours. It really depended upon the genetic characteristics of the individual. If a person had a genetic makeup based on a strong extraterrestrial background, he had a longer lifespan. This information is spoken about very clearly in the Bible. It is given that the ages of certain biblical figures are well over 100 years, like Moses. Some are given quite long lifetimes. Those records are out there. Over time, as you all have evolved away from being a part of the earth, your lifespans have gotten shorter. This is because when you are one with the earth, you channel the life force of the earth and it rejuvenates you. But when you cut yourself off from your life force, you deteriorate faster. This is why Native Americans have such long lifespans and Yogis who live up in the Himalayas do, too. They have, as much as they could, kept their connections with Earth. Your lifespan will grow longer the more you reconnect with the Earth. As your consciousness changes, your lifespan will grow.